They were silent, deadly, and destined for a short and brutal life. Welcome to Sleepless Mysteries, where history's shadows come alive just as your eyes begin to close. In tonight's tale, we descend into the hidden world of medieval assassins. Not the glorified warriors from movies, but real figures who lived lives of fear, hunger, and betrayal. You may be watching this, curled under the blankets, safe and still, but assassins of the past had no such peace. By the way, what time are you listening to this story? Is it late at night, or are you sneaking in a nap during the day? Leave a comment below and let us know. Now, close your eyes, breathe slow, and let us guide you into the first chapter of this grim and secretive world. In the dim corners of forgotten castles and behind the thick stone walls of secluded monasteries, a different kind of warrior was born. Not on the battlefield, but in the silence of hidden chambers. To become a medieval assassin was not a choice made in freedom. It was often a last resort for the desperate, the orphaned, or the enslaved. These men, sometimes even boys, were not trained in honor or glory, but in poison, stealth, and the art of silent death. Many were plucked from tragedy, stolen from war-torn villages, or sold by starving families, then reshaped into shadows with blades. Training was brutal. The mind had to be broken before it could be rebuilt. Initiates were often locked in dark rooms for days, starved, beaten, and tested without mercy. The body was hardened through endless drills, running barefoot, across gravel, crawling through cold mud, sparring with dull blades until skin tore and bruises turned purple. Fear was something they were taught to master, not avoid. If you flinched, you failed, and failure was met not with correction, but punishment. The mentors did not speak gently. They whispered threats, or said nothing at all. Once the body was hardened, the soul had to be claimed. This was done through what was known only as the blood oath. It was not just ceremony, it was transformation. The initiate would kneel in a candlelit chamber, surrounded by men in dark robes. A dagger was placed at his feet, a bowl of animal blood beside it, sometimes mixed with the blood of a former assassin who had died on a mission. With trembling hands, the boy would cut his palm, letting the blood drip into the bowl, then swear eternal silence, obedience, and loyalty. From that moment forward, he no longer had a name, only a purpose. Life after the oath was not much easier. Sleep was rationed. Meals were cold and infrequent. Every day was a new test. One day, it might be sneaking past a sleeping dog without waking it. The next might involve navigating a maze, blindfolded with only the sound of dripping water to guide the way. They were taught to strike pressure points, to dislocate bones with a twist, and to kill without hesitation. They learned to walk without sound, to blend into shadows, and to hold their breath for minutes at a time. The lucky ones survived. The rest disappeared, their failures buried without name or prayer. Weapons were sacred, not for power, but for precision. Blades were thin, light, and often coated in poison. These poisons were harvested by hand from frogs, mold, and plants found only deep in cursed forests. Assassins kept small vials hidden in their clothing, some in their mouths, others tied to the inside of their boots. A single drop could kill in seconds, but harvesting and handling the toxin was dangerous. Many trainees lost their sight or their minds from accidental exposure. Still, they pressed on, because to fail meant to be cast out, and to be cast out meant death. Once trained, the real horror began. Missions came in secret, delivered through coded scrolls or whispered at night by unseen messengers. The targets were often nobles, merchants, or rival warlords. Rarely were the reasons explained. They were taught not to ask. You do not question the hand that feeds you, even if that hand is soaked in blood. The assassin would travel alone, using stolen clothes, forged papers, and false names. They avoided inns, drank from streams, and slept in trees. To be seen was to be remembered, and to be remembered was to be hunted. The first kill was always the worst. Even with all the training, nothing could prepare them for the sound, the warmth, the look in the eyes of a dying man. Some assassins vomited after, others wept in silence. A few never returned, but most learned to bury the feeling deep beneath layers of ice and obedience. Each mission was another piece of their soul chipped away, until only the assassin remained, no longer human, just a tool. But perhaps the cruelest part of their life was this: they could never leave. Once you took the oath, you belonged to the order until death. Some tried to escape, believing they could start over in a distant land. They rarely made it far. Okana, the order, had eyes in every corner, and betrayal was answered swiftly. Runaways were hunted, captured, and made examples of. Their bodies left hanging in town squares, marked with symbols that only other assassins understood. A message in blood: you are never free. And so the life of a medieval assassin was not one of adventure or glory, but of silence, fear, and endless shadows. They walked among the living, yet lived as ghosts, bound by vows, haunted by guilt, and forgotten by the very world they served. As you begin to drift off now, remember that behind every noble's death, behind every silent scream, was someone who had no choice, only orders. The blood oath did not end with the blade. It lived on in every breath they took, and in every dream they tried to forget. To survive as a medieval assassin, one had to become someone else entirely. Or, more accurately, become no one at all. The world could not know your name, your face, or your voice. You were to be a phantom. A rumor passed between frightened guards and dying nobles. The less people knew of you, the safer you were. But that kind of life came with a heavy cost, and the burden of wearing a mask for so long was that eventually you forgot who was underneath. Assassins were taught to fabricate identities like cloaks. One day, a mute beggar. The next, a traveling monk. Then, a merchant's assistant with a fake accent and a limp. They learned how to mirror mannerisms, forge documents, and alter their posture, voice, and even smell. Perfumed oils, smoke from a certain wood, or a specific herb rubbed into their clothes. All were tricks to mask their true selves. To those who passed them on the road, they were just another forgettable traveler. But that forgettability was their sharpest blade. They never stayed long in one place. A single night in a village, a half day in a tavern. No names given, no friends made. Their faces were always hidden beneath hoods, shadowed by cloaks, or dirtied by soot and grime. The more common they looked, the safer they were. They avoided beauty. They avoided cleanliness. The best assassin looked like no one at all. Like a man you saw yesterday, but can't quite remember. Yet the world was filled with dangers that no disguise could hide from. Suspicious guards, spies loyal to rival guilds, dogs that could smell fear, and of course, the eyes of their own brothers, watching them even when they thought they were alone. Trust did not exist. Not with the locals, not with the targets, and not even with fellow assassins. Everyone was a possible threat, or worse, a test from the order. Punishment for even the smallest slip was swift. Speak out of turn to a noble, disappear, stay too long in one place, vanish, fail to send confirmation of a completed mission. Your next visitor was not a friend. Sometimes these punishments were public, a warning. Other times, the assassins just stopped returning, and those who remained knew better than to ask questions. The missions themselves were nightmares stitched into daylight. Often the targets were surrounded by walls, guards, dogs, and multiple layers of defenses. The assassin had to plan every step, study the guards' movements, map the escape route, learn when servants changed shifts. It could take weeks of careful observation, sleeping in stables, eavesdropping from behind barrels, or posing as a drunk near the castle gates. One wrong move, and it was over. Capture did not mean imprisonment. It meant torture and a slow death. And if you were lucky, your own order would kill you first. Sometimes the kill was clean. A knife between ribs in a dark hallway, a poisoned goblet switched just before a feast. But other times, the target fought back, screamed, drew blood of their own. And in those moments, the assassin had to kill not just the target, but anyone who saw their face. Servants, children, even innocent bystanders. Mercy was weakness. Tease was punished. After each mission, the assassin returned, not to celebration, but silence. There was no praise, no payment beyond a stale meal in a dry bed. The satisfaction was survival. And the only reward, another mission. Many assassins kept journals, hidden away in cracks in walls or buried under old trees, scribbled confessions, prayers, regrets. They wrote not for remembrance, but to remember that they were still human. That beneath the hood, beneath the dried blood and silent footsteps, they had once been someone else. And yet, despite everything, many assassins began to believe in the cause. They convinced themselves they were bringing balance, that every noble they killed was corrupt, that every rival slain was part of something evil. It was easier than facing the truth, that they were weapons, not heroes, tools forged in suffering, wielded in silence. But belief could not quiet the nightmares, the shaking hands, the feeling of being hunted, even in dreams. They drank herbs to sleep. Some whispered old prayers to forgotten gods. Others stared at the ceiling each night, waiting for a knock that never came. Because the deeper into the life they went, the more they realized that the real enemy was not outside. It was within. To wear a mask for so long, to become no one for so many years, meant that one day you looked into a stream and saw a stranger staring back. A man who had no home, no past, no future, only missions, only death. As you began to relax deeper into your bed, your limbs heavy, your breath slow, imagine that world. A life spent pretending, hiding, killing, and never knowing if tomorrow would come. A life lived in shadow, where every footstep could be your last. That was the world of the medieval assassin, silent, lonely, and utterly without peace. Assassins did not rely only on blades. They mastered the art of poison, like a musician learns the strings of a lute. From the swamps, forests, and gardens came deadly tinctures that could kill in silence, without trace, without struggle. It was not enough to stab a man in the dark. True mastery meant never having to draw a weapon at all. A single drop in wine, a dusting on a handkerchief, or a pinprick on a chair could end a life before anyone realized it had begun. The craft of poison was not just dangerous, it was obsessive. Assassins spent months learning how to extract venom from frogs, how to distill nightshade into syrup, how to cook foxglove leaves without killing themselves in the process. Mistakes were common. Many assassins died not from enemy blades, but from their own concoctions. Hands blistered, eyes swelled shut, tones went numb. Every lesson cost something. Some poisons worked fast, choking the breath from a man before he could cry out. Others were slow, causing fever, confusion, and agony for days. These were used when messages needed to be sent. When pain itself became a weapon, assassins were instructed in dosage, in how to make the death look like illness, accident, or even a curse. In a world ruled by superstition, it was easy to disappear behind fear. The tools of the trade were often disguised as ordinary things: hollow rings with hidden needles, perfume bottles filled with toxins, hairpins dipped in venom. A favorite method was to poison the corner of a scroll, knowing that the noble would lick his fingers before turning the page. The assassin only needed patience and silence. The gathering of ingredients became a mission on its own. Assassins roamed through dense forests, hunted rare insects, and bribed apothecaries under the veil of night. They traveled to swamps where the air stank of rot, kneeling in mud to capture the slimy creatures that held death in their glands. The more rare the poison, the higher the praise from the order. Testings were brutal. Assassins were made to take tiny samples of each poison to build resistance. Mouths burned, limbs trembled. Many hallucinated for days. But this training meant survival. If an assassin was captured and forced to drink poison, they might live. If a rival tried to lace their food, they might resist long enough to escape. Pain was a teacher. Death was always waiting. Some poisons did not kill at all. Instead, they made the target vulnerable. Sleeping powders that dulled the senses. Liquids that caused confusion, dizziness, or hallucinations. These were useful when a clean kill was not the goal. When information was needed, or when a message had to be carved into a wall in the victim's blood. One of the most feared toxins was the black draft, a mix of crushed beetles, mold, and aged venom. So foul it caused organs to shut down within minutes. Few ever used it more than once. The sight of its effects haunted even the most hardened assassins. Screams, foaming mouths, eyes wide with horror. It was a reminder that their work was never clean, never noble, only necessary. They carried these poisons hidden in every fold of their garments, tiny vials sewn into belts, beads of poison shaped like jewelry, even hollow teeth that could be bitten down on in a moment of desperation. An assassin had to be ready to kill or to die at any moment. Making poisons also meant making antidotes. These were closely guarded secrets, shared only among the most senior assassins. The wrong mix could be fatal. But without it, a simple cut or sip from the wrong cup could end a career in silence. Paranoia ran deep. Many assassins refused to eat in the company of others. Meals were tested. Water was boiled. Some grew so cautious they starved themselves between missions, fearing betrayal even from within. The mental toll was severe. Knowing that your hands held death, knowing that every breath you exhaled might carry a toxin. War on the spirit. Assassins often isolated themselves, speaking little, trusting no one. The more skilled they became, the more dangerous they were to everyone around them, even those they wished to protect. As you drift off tonight, imagine carrying poison in your pocket, in your breath, beneath your fingernails. I imagine the constant weight of suspicion, of fear, of the knowledge that one mistake could mean your own death, slow and painful. This was the reality of the medieval assassin. Not glory, not honor, but endless shadows, and the quiet power to kill with a touch. The life of a medieval assassin was a path walked alone. There were no friends, no companions, only shadows for company and silence for comfort. Brotherhood was a word used during training, but it quickly faded once the missions began. Each assassin was taught not to rely on others, not to trust, not to speak more than was necessary. Isolation was part of the job. They could not afford attachments. A friend could become a weakness. A lover could become a liability. Family was a thing left behind or taken away during their recruitment. The order made sure of it. Assassins were ghosts, and ghosts did not belong to the world of the living. They drifted through towns and villages, unseen, unnoticed, and unloved. There was no room for joy, music, laughter, festivals. All things that brought warmth to others were forbidden luxuries. Even if an assassin stopped to enjoy a tune played in a tavern, he risked being seen, risked becoming human again. And being human made the blade shake, made the hand hesitate. The order could not allow that. The constant moving, the changing identities, to pretending to be someone else every day. It wore on the soul. Eventually, the assassin no longer knew who he truly was. He forgot what his real name sounded like, forgot where he was born. The faces of his family blurred like old ink in the rain. All that remained was the mission. Sometimes they longed for conversation, even if just a moment of honesty with another soul. But the fear was always there. What if the listener was a spy? What if they misunderstood? What if the order found out? So the assassin kept silent, holding words in like poison, until the weight of them became unbearable. They spoke to themselves instead, in whispers, in scribbled notes. Some carved their thoughts into trees or the underside of bridges, not because they wanted to be found, but because they needed to remember that they once existed, that beneath the hood there was still a man, a voice, a memory trying not to fade. The rare times they met other assassins on the road, there were no greetings, no handshakes, only a nod, a passing glance, and then silence. Each one carried secrets. Each one carried death. Better to walk alone than to risk betrayal, or be the reason someone else failed. The order watched everything, even those moments of quiet. Nights were the hardest. In the day, there was something to focus on, planning, hiding, watching. But at night, when the fire burned low and the world became still, the thoughts crept in, faces of the dead, echoes of screams. The image of a child watching as his father collapsed. These things did not go away. They waited in the dark. To sleep meant to dream, and dreams were never kind. Assassins took sleeping herbs, but even then, their rest was shallow. Every creak of a floorboard, every howl of the wind, every distant voice caused them to reach for their blade. The body remained tense, even in slumber. Rest was not peace, it was survival. As years passed, the loneliness became more than just a feeling. It became a sickness, a quiet madness. Some assassins began to see things that weren't there, hear voices in the trees, feel eyes watching them when no one was near. They talked to shadows, argued with ghosts. And still, they continued the missions. The order offered no comfort, no healer, no priest, only silence. An assassin was expected to endure or disappear. There were always more recruits waiting to take their place. The world was never short on the broken, the desperate, the lost. The order simply gave them purpose, even if that purpose was death. As you lie still, sinking deeper into calm, picture the assassin under a pale moon, sitting beside a dying fire, his hands shaking, his face hidden. Picture the loneliness that follows him like a shadow, never speaking, but never leaving. This was not the life of a warrior. This was the sentence of a soul, too valuable to kill, but too dangerous to love. That was the path of the assassin, cold, silent, alone. An assassin's greatest fear was not the blade of a rival or the arrow of a guard. It was betrayal from within the order itself. Trust was a lie told during training, a flickering illusion meant to keep recruits loyal. But once blood had been spilled and missions carried out, the reality became clear. No one was safe, not even from those who wore the same cloak. The order was ancient, older than many kings, and with age came secrets. Layers of deception wrapped around layers of control. Assassins were not just killers. They were tools, assets, pawns on a board too vast to see clearly. Orders were given without explanation. Reasons were forbidden. You killed who you were told, or you were killed yourself. Some assassins began to question, quietly at first, then in whispers behind locked doors. Why this noble and not another? Why this mission in the dead of winter? Why silence after success? But the order had ways of listening, ways of knowing, and those who doubted too loudly were marked. The signs were subtle, a message that never arrived, a contact who failed to show, a sudden reassignment to a mission with little chance of survival. Assassins were not told they were being punished. They simply disappeared. And the others learned quickly. Silence was safety. Paranoia became part of the job. Assassins began to test each other, leaving false messages, spreading lies to see what would echo back. They watched their brothers as closely as their enemies. Every nod, every gesture, every delay in response was a signal to decode. Some went mad from it. Others became colder, harder, as if their hearts had been carved from stone. The order encouraged it. They believed that competition bred strength, that fear sharpened the blade. In every region, there were informants, spies placed among the assassins themselves. These men looked like allies, spoke like brothers, but served a different master. One word from them, and your fate was sealed. Betrayal came in many forms: missing antidote before a poisoned meal, a rope cut just before a climb, a map altered by a single detail, enough to lead you into a trap. Assassins died thinking they had made a mistake, not knowing they had been chosen to fall. Some assassins tried to rise within the order, believing power would bring safety. But the higher they climbed, the more dangerous the game became. Councils of elders who never showed their faces. Messages delivered by children who vanished after the words were spoken. No meetings, no records, only silence and control. The few who survived long enough to question the system faced a bitter truth. There was no leaving. Retirement was a myth. Freedom was a lie. The order owned your blood, your memories, your future. Even death was not release. It was protocol. Assassins who grew too old were often sent on final missions with no return path. This knowledge hollowed them. Even the fiercest killers began to fade. They spoke less, slept less, trusted no one. They kept weapons under their pillows, poisoned sewn into their robes, escape plans for every building they entered. Not because of enemies, but because of brothers. And when betrayal did come, it came swift and silent. A blade across the throat while bathing, a whisper in the ear just before sleep, a face you knew, delivering your end without hesitation. And then, as always, nothing. No questions, no justice. Only the mission, moving on, as if you had never existed. As your eyes grow heavier and your body sinks deeper into stillness, imagine the life of a man who cannot trust, not even the ones who trained beside him, not even those who share his pain. Betrayal within was not rare. It was constant. It was expected. In the order, there were no friends, only threats that had not struck yet. And that was what made the life of a medieval assassin truly unbearable. You were always alone, even among your own. Killing was easy. What was hard was not killing. Mercy was the one thing an assassin was trained to forget, to bury deep beneath layers of obedience and fear. Yet, every assassin faced a moment when a target looked at them with familiar eyes, when the blade hovered and something inside begged them to stop. That hesitation, that flicker of mercy, could cost everything. The order warned against it from the beginning. Mercy was weakness. Weakness was death. They told stories of assassins who spared a child, who let a noble's wife flee, who refused to strike a priest kneeling in prayer. Each of those stories ended the same way. This assassin was hunted, dragged back, and made an example of. And yet, the urge remained, because even ghosts remember what it feels like to be human. They remember hunger, fear, the way someone once showed them kindness. That memory never vanished, no matter how many kills they completed. In the quiet hours, it haunted them, a reminder that they had once had a soul. Mercy did not always mean sparing a life. Sometimes it meant a quicker death, a clean strike instead of poison. A kill made in the dark, so the victim never knew. A silent end, rather than one filled with screaming. These small acts were the only mercy an assassin could offer, and even then, they risked punishment. There were moments when mercy clashed with a mission, a target who had children, a noble who fed the poor, a rival assassin begging with tears in their eyes. The order demanded results, not questions, but questions crept in anyway. Late at night, after the blood dried, after the face of the victim refused to fade from memory, some assassins began to keep small tokens from those they spared. A piece of cloth, a lock of hair, a child's drawing. These were hidden deep in their cloaks or buried near safe houses, never spoken of. To be caught with such things was treason, but to throw them away felt like killing the last part of themselves that still cared. Over time, the weight grew. Every spared life carried risk. That child might grow up and talk. That rival might return with vengeance. That priest might recognize you on the road. Mercy created shadows in the mind, doubts in every step, and the order did not tolerate doubt. When an assassin was suspected of showing mercy, they were summoned. No explanation, just a message. A meeting in a stone room with no windows. There, the questions began, slow, cold, unforgiving, and then came the punishment. A finger removed, a scar carved into the chest, a toxin forced down their throat, and, if they survived, a final chance to prove their loyalty. The lucky ones were never called. The others wore their scars in silence, not as marks of failure, but as reminders. That feeling was dangerous. That caring was a crime. Kindness could not exist. But mercy did not always die. In some assassins, it grew in secret. They began choosing targets differently, altering plans to avoid innocent blood, risking their own lives to protect strangers they barely knew. And slowly, those assassins disappeared, not because they were killed, but because they ran. Escape was nearly impossible, but not unthinkable. The ones who tried it usually failed, found days later, lifeless, their bodies marked with a single black line across the face. But a few made it. They vanished into the wilderness, changed their names, lived in silence, hoping the order would forget. As you close your eyes and drift deeper into rest, imagine the blade in your hand and the eyes staring up at you. Imagine the silence before a kill, broken by a heartbeat that isn't yours. That was the choice every assassin faced, to follow orders, or to listen to the small voice inside that begged them not to. Mercy had a price, and for a medieval assassin, that price was everything. Every life taken left behind something unseen, a memory, a breath, a name never spoken again. For a medieval assassin, the dead did not simply vanish. They clung to the soul like fog to a riverbank, cold, damp, impossible to shake. The order never spoke of this burden. They trained the body, they trained the hands, but they never trained the heart, because to them, the heart was a liability. An assassin was not supposed to feel, but feelings did not vanish with silence. They only hid. After every kill, the assassin cleaned the blade, burned the clothes, whispered the final words of the mission. But the mind remembered. The twitch of the dying man's hand, the blood pooling at the base of a stair. The eyes, always the eyes, wide with shock, sometimes with fear, sometimes with peace. These images stayed. They came back in dreams, in moments between footsteps, in flashes when water rippled or wind rustled the trees just right. The assassin would look over their shoulder. Sure, someone was there, even when no one was. The dead had a way of finding you, even after the body was buried. The more skilled the assassin, the more names they carried. Not written, not spoken, but felt. A tightness in the chest when walking through a marketplace. A chill on the back of the neck when hearing laughter. They would see a stranger's face, and something inside would whisper, "You've seen eyes like that before." just before they closed forever. Some tried to forget. They drank, smoked herbs, starved themselves. Others carved tattoos into their arms, one for each life taken, hoping that the pain would balance the weight. But it never did. The faces remained. The memories became louder with time, not quieter. In the beginning, they killed strangers, nobles, rivals, men whose names meant nothing. But as they rose through the ranks, the missions changed. They were sent after scholars, after priests, after midwives who knew too much. They were told nothing, only that the kill was necessary. And slowly, the line between justice and murder blurred, then vanished. The assassin became two people, one who killed without thought, and one who grieved in silence. These two halves warred inside. One side sharpened the blade. The other clutched the token left behind, a child's ribbon, a broken necklace, a prayer whispered through tears. The order saw hesitation as failure, but to the assassin, it was all that kept him human. They could not confess. There were no priests for them, no absolution. The only place they could speak was inside their minds, or in the pages of journals hidden beneath floorboards and loose stones. Pages filled with names, apologies, with desperate questions. Did I have to? Did they deserve it? Will someone remember them? If not me, then who? Some assassins began to talk to the dead, not in madness, but in ritual. Before a mission, they would say a prayer. After a kill, they would whisper the name of the victim, if they knew it, and if not, they gave them one. They did this not for forgiveness, but to acknowledge the life that had been taken. A final act of defiance against the silence the order demanded. The guilt was a shadow that never left. It followed them on every road, slipped into every dream, and stared back from every mirror. It made food taste like ash, made fire feel cold, made even the warmth of the sun feel like a lie. The more they killed, the more the assassin realized they were digging their own grave, one body at a time. But guilt was not just a burden, it was also a shield. The assassins who felt nothing, they were the most dangerous, cold, efficient, empty. They did not hesitate. They did not remember. They did not suffer. And yet, they were the ones most likely to break without warning. Because when the heart is gone, there is nothing left to hold back the darkness. So the assassins who lasted longest were not the ones who felt nothing, but the ones who felt everything and still chose to continue. They carried their sorrow like a blade, sharp, heavy, always close. It hurt, but it grounded them, kept them from becoming monsters. Even so, some reached a breaking point, the final straw. A child killed by mistake, a familiar face on the target list, a plea for mercy that echoed too close to home. And in that moment, they dropped the blade, walked away, vanished into the world. The order called them traitors. But in truth, they were simply men who had felt too much for too long. Those who left lived in fear of being found, of being dragged back, but they also lived in truth. They tried to plant gardens, to learn music, to teach children how to read, and though the dead still haunted them, they no longer ran from them. They spoke their names. They built stones in the woods with the initials carved, even if the names were wrong, because at least it was something. As your breath slows and the night deepens around you, imagine the silence that follows a kill. Not the silence of success, but the silence of regret, the heavy kind, the kind that wraps around the bones and stays there. That was the weight every assassin carried, not the blade, but the dead who followed them, step for step, whispering softly in the dark. To be an assassin was to live in the spaces between things, between names, between faces, between lives that others lived freely. The longer ones served the order, the more they ceased to exist in the world that surrounded them. not in death, but in disappearance. They were not remembered. They were not seen. They were ghosts before they were even buried. It began with the loss of identity. No surname, no home, no birthplace worth claiming. Old memories faded like ink left in rain. Kiev and their own voice began to feel unfamiliar, only used when necessary, and always whispered. They stopped recognizing their own handwriting, their reflection in water, their laugh, if they still remembered how to make that sound. When they walked into villages, no one turned to look. They had perfected the art of being forgettable. Neutral clothing, neutral expression. Even their footsteps were practiced to avoid attention. They left no trace, no stories, no names passed in gossip. Just shadows that moved on without leaving warmth behind. The vanishing was not just social, it was spiritual. Assassins did not worship gods, not because they rejected faith, but because they were not allowed to hope. Hope was the seed of dreams, and dreams had no place in the order. They were forbidden from lighting candles in temples, from kneeling in sacred spaces, from writing prayers. Their life belonged to the order, and the order allowed no rivals. They stopped celebrating birthdays, stopped marking the passage of time. Seasons came and went, unnoticed. One day lured into the next, until even the sky felt unfamiliar. They traveled constantly, from one end of the continent to another. Never long enough to build memories, never slow enough to breathe. Some assassins began to question if they were even alive, not in a physical sense, but in the way that mattered. They felt hunger, cold, pain, but joy, excitement, even grief. Those things faded. And without those, what was left? A machine, a tool, a ghost. The world around them was vibrant, full of laughter, music, light, but it all passed through them, never touching. They would walk past lovers dancing near a fire, children chasing each other through fields, old friends laughing over shared wine, and they felt nothing, just a wall, thick and silent, between them and the rest of life. Some tried to feel again. They would stop for a moment to listen to music, watch a sunset, smell bread baking in the morning. But these things made the emptiness worse, not better. It reminded them of what had been taken, what they had given up, and what could never be reclaimed. They began to forget the sound of their mother's voice, the shape of their father's hands, the name of the first person they ever loved. These memories didn't disappear all at once. They faded in pieces. First the tone, then the face, then the feeling, until all that remained was a strange ache, a ghost of something once important. The order encouraged this. They wanted their assassins detached, cold, unanchored by the past. When a recruit still clung to old memories, they were sent on harder missions, more isolating, more brutal, till the only thing they had left was the mission, the kill, the silence. When an assassin died, there was no grave, no ceremony, sometimes not even a name spoken. Coup. The order recorded the mission as failed or completed, and then the page turned. Other would take their place, a new blade, a new ghost. The world never knew they were gone, because the world had never known they were there. Some assassins, realizing this, tried to leave something behind, a mark carved into stone, a phrase written under a bridge, a song taught to a stranger. Something small, meaningless to most, but a piece of them embedded in the world. A last attempt not to vanish completely, but those things were not meant to last. Rain washed away the words. Time dulled the carvings. The stranger forgot the melody. And still, the assassin walked on, unseen, unheard, untouched. There were moments, rare, when someone noticed. A child staring too long, a dog that refused to go near, an old woman who muttered a name they hadn't heard in years. In those moments, the assassin froze, wondered if, perhaps, just for a second, they had not disappeared entirely. But it never lasted. the child was pulled away. The dog lost interest. The old woman passed on, quando. The world closed around them like mist, swallowing what little remained of who they had once been. As your body sinks deeper into stillness and your mind drifts towards sleep, picture the quiet figure beneath the trees, hood low, eyes tired, watching a world they can no longer reach. The life of a medieval assassin was not just filled with blood, but with erasure. Achaia, they did not simply kill. They disappeared. And in doing so, they became the very thing they feared most, forgotten. Every assassin eventually reached a point where the missions no longer made sense, where the kills blurred together, where the days felt like echoes of one another. That moment came not with a scream, but with a whisper, a quiet realization in the dark that something was different, that something had shifted, that the next mission might be the last. The Order never told you it was your final task. They never offered a farewell. There was no reward, no promotion, no peace, just a message, a slip of parchment tucked under a door, a whisper from a masked courier, a flick of a candle in a secret chamber. The words were always simple, a name, a location, a date, nothing more. What the experienced assassin always knew. It was the way the assignment felt heavier, the way the silence around it was colder, a polka, the way no one met your eyes when it was handed to you. It was a death sentence wrapped in ritual, and every seasoned assassin could feel it deep in their bones, like frost spreading beneath the skin. Sometimes the target was someone powerful, a noble whose death would change entire kingdoms. Other times, it was someone no one would miss, a scholar, a rogue, a deserter from the Order itself. The weight was never in the person, but in what the kill meant. Finality, closure, or erasure. The assassin would pack slower, move with more care. Not because of fear, but because of memory. They would visit places they had not seen in years, walk roads they once trained on, look for faces in crowds that no longer remembered them. The journey was not about getting to the kill, but about saying goodbye to the world they had haunted. They often left behind little things, a blade buried in the roots of a tree, a ring slipped into the hands of a statue, a coin under the doorstep of a home they once knew. These were not signs for others. They were markers for themselves, proof that they had existed, that something of them remained. The final mission was never rushed, was methodical, clean, as if the assassin wanted to write the last chapter of their life with perfect penmanship. Every detail was studied, every exit memorized, every risk accounted for. There was no room for error, because there would be no next chance. And yet, in the quiet hours before the strike, doubt crept in, the same doubt they had buried for years. Was this necessary? Was this just? Would the world truly change because of this kill? Or was this just another body in the long chain of obedience? Some assassins pressed forward, others hesitated. A few turned away, knowing full well what would follow. The ones who walked away were hunted, marked, their names etched into scrolls passed between cloaked men. Every assassin in the Order knew what those names meant, not betrayal, but defiance. Still, few dared to question. The Order's justice was swift, unforgiving, final. But even those who completed the final mission were not spared. The kill was never the end. It was only the beginning of the unraveling. The Order knew how to erase their own, quietly, efficiently, sometimes with a blade in the dark, sometimes with poison in a cup offered in false gratitude. Other times, they were simply sent on another mission that had no return path. There were stories whispered by those who trained long ago, of assassins who knew the truth and chose their own end, who walked into the sea, who vanished into the mountains, who laid down their blades and disappeared so completely that not even the Order could find them. Whether they lived or died was unknown. Their names were gone, but the silence they left behind spoke volumes. The final mission was not always about death. Sometimes it was about choice. The assassin could choose to complete it or choose to disappear. That was the cruelest part of it. Not the kill, but the knowing, the clarity that came too late. That everything had led to this point. And now the assassin had to decide who they truly were. Some wrote letters, not to be sent, but to be burned. Letters to mothers long dead, to brothers forgotten, to lovers they never had. These words were their only confession, their only truth. Words soaked with guilt, sorrow, and the ache of a life lived in silence. When the final mission was done, the assassin would vanish, either by the order's hand or their own. The world would go on. Another would take their place. Another blade would be trained. Another ghost would rise. The cycle never stopped. The order saw to that. But in rare cases, something different happened. A child was spared. A truth was revealed. A target turned out to be someone the assassin once knew. And in that moment, the mask cracked. And the assassin made a choice that changed everything. Some say those moments broke the order's rules. Others say they were the only moments that mattered. There are hidden graves in quiet forests, stones without names, marks carved into trees that no traveler understands. Some say those are where the old assassins sleep, not buried by the order, but by the few who remembered them, who saw them not as killers, but as men lost to time. As you settle into deeper sleep, imagine the assassin on their final mission, their cloak heavier than ever, their footsteps slower, their breath long and still. Somewhere, a name waits on their blade, but deeper than that, a decision waits in their soul. Do they return? Do they vanish? Do they finally become more than what they were made to be? That final choice, that last mission, was not about death. It was about freedom, the only real kind they had ever known. And for the assassin, that was more terrifying than any enemy, because freedom meant facing everything they had run from, everything they had killed for, everything they had become. In the silence of that moment, beneath stars, beside stone walls, or deep in a forest clearing, the assassin stood alone, and for once, truly alone. They were not afraid. Not of death, not of the order, but of the life they might still have, if they only dared to take it. When the blade was finally laid to rest, when the cloak was folded and left behind, what remained of the assassin? That was the question few ever asked, because, in truth, the world did not notice. The people they protected never knew they were there. The ones they killed were erased without trial, and those who trained them refused to remember. But even shadows leave marks. Even ghosts leave whispers. Some assassins tried to leave a legacy, not of death, but of meaning. They wrote journals hidden in walls. They carved warnings into trees, not just to tell their stories, but to guide others. These messages were not for glory. They were not for fame. They were for the ones who came after, the broken, the lonely, the forgotten, to show that they were not alone. The order would have destroyed those words, would have hunted down any trace of disobedience, but some survived, passed in secret from one trembling hand to another. Stories of assassins who questioned the mission, who spared the child, who walked away from the kill and kept walking. These were not heroes, but they were real. In the far corners of the world, deep forests, crumbling ruins, mountain caves, there are places where old blades lie untouched, places where the order cannot reach. Some say these are the homes of those who escaped. Others say they are graves. But either way, they are monuments, not to skill, but to survival. The assassin's true legacy was not written in history books. It was written in the silence between wars, in the nobles who never knew they had been spared, in the peace that lasted a little longer because one man chose not to pull his blade. These were the legacies that mattered. Quiet, invisible, real. The order never honored its dead. No graves, no records. When an assassin vanished, they were replaced. Their cloak passed on, their tools recycled, the name wiped clean. But in some quiet places, the old assassins honored each other. Not with words, but with memory, with small offerings left on stone, with the simple act of lighting a candle. There were signs, unspoken signals passed between those who had once belonged. A mark carved on the underside of a bridge, a pattern of stones near a riverbank. These were not just for safety. They were acknowledgments, a silent nod across time. I see you. I remember. You still exist. Most never made it that far. Most died with nothing left behind but a whisper. But for those few who did, who lived to reflect, their legacy was a burden they still carried. Some became wanderers, healing those they once would have killed. Some took apprentices, not to train them as killers, but to protect them from ever becoming one. Not all who left the order stayed free. Some were captured, broken, dragged back, and erased. But even in that, they left behind a story, a possibility that escape was not a myth, that even in the coldest darkness, a spark could survive. As the world moved on, as kingdoms rose and fell, the order changed. New leaders, new rules. The mission remained the same. Silence, obedience, death. Still, the whispers continued, of assassins who questioned, of missions that failed by design, of moments when the blade paused just long enough to let a life go on. The world owes more than it knows to those moments, to the assassins who defied their orders and chose humanity, to the wars that never began, the rulers who lived long enough to change their ways, the villages that never burned. These are the legacies the order never claimed, but they remain. Some say that the order still exists, that they operate in the shadows of modern times, hidden behind masks of diplomacy and politics, that they still train new blades, still demand silence, still erase their own. But even if that is true, the same truth remains. Some will always question, and some will always walk away. As your mind drifts deeper into rest, as the stillness of night wraps around you, imagine one last figure walking alone down a forest path. His blade is sheathed, his hood lowered, his hand steady, not with fear, but with peace. He is not running. He is not hiding. He's remembering. He passes the ruins of a chapel, stops, kneels, and lights a candle for the ones who never made it out, for the ones who stayed, for the ones who still believe they are only what the order made them. The flame flickers, small, soft, but unyielding. And then he continues walking, not to another mission, not to another kill, but to a place where his name matters, where his story is not just silence, where his legacy is not written in blood, but in choice, because in the end, that was the only power the assassin truly had. Not the ability to kill, but the ability to choose not to. The power to walk away, to remember who he was, to build something in the ashes of what he destroyed. And maybe, just maybe, to be remembered not as a ghost, but as a man. The story of the medieval assassin is not one of glory, but of quiet sorrow. Behind every mission was a life unlived. Behind every kill was a heart that had once hoped for something more. They were not heroes. They were not villains. They were men taken from the world too soon, shaped into shadows, and taught to forget the light. What made their lives tragic was not just the death they brought, but the life they were denied, the laughter they never shared, the peace they never found, the names they were forced to forget, including their own. They became ghosts, not in death, but in life. And yet, within that silence, there was still something deeply human. A flicker of mercy, a moment of doubt, a final choice to walk away. Those moments remind us that even in the darkest paths, the soul still tries to speak. As you lie here now.com, still and safe. Imagine the footsteps fading into the distance, not toward another mission, but toward freedom, toward something that feels like peace. That is the ending the assassin never believed he could have, but perhaps, in dreams, he finds it. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the forgotten world of the medieval assassin. If you're still awake, let us know what time you're listening to this story. And if you're already asleep, may your rest be deep, your dreams quiet, and your heart untroubled. Until next time, sleep well.